it looks like we've got most people tuned in. Hope you're all having a great night wherever you are. There's Jeff. Let's start letting some other people in. Thanks for joining us Tuesday night. I don't know what it's like where you guys are, Jen. I mean, Scott, let's not even talk about you. You're somewhere typically a lot warmer than where we are. But this is the warmest tasting evening I think we've had in a while. Like, it feels hot.
How warm is it up there?
Like 18 or 19, I think it hit today. So
Wait, let me just convert that into Fahrenheit
don't
quickly, because I am bilingual.
we don't calculate temperatures in archaic scales that have no basis in scientific rigor.
It may be a little warmer there than it is here in California, but it's been beautiful here the past few days as well.
Are you in the Bay Area?
No, I'm not. I'm up in the mountains now. I'm up near Lake Tahoe.
You're near Tahoe. Like, got some snow this year.
Yeah. I'm at about halfway up the mountain on the way to Lake Tahoe.
Okay.
So
Fun.
yeah.
So that old ditty about summers in San Francisco don't really necessarily apply to you.
No, but it's absolutely true. Like
I've been there in June before, and I rented one of those city bikes to take it across the bridge. And it's like, I don't think it feels this cold in Calgary in the middle of winter when it's minus 40.
I mean, you're not wrong. That's when all the fog comes in. They call it, the fog has a name. It's actually called Carl the Fog. Carl with a K is the name of the fog in San Francisco. And yeah, June and July, like 4:30 in the afternoon, that fog just comes rolling in and just suffocates the city. I mean, it's kind of really cool to watch if you've never seen it before. It's like a 100-meter high, it almost looks like a tidal wave of fog coming in off the ocean. It's cool. But yeah. Strangely, October's always one of the nicest months in San Francisco.
Well, it can be nice up here on the eastern slopes of the Canadian Rockies too. But anyway, people are probably wondering why we're talking about the weather in the Bay Area and on the slopes up to Tahoe, but we're just killing time until everybody's here. We might as well get started. So thanks for joining us, everyone. We're thrilled to have Scott Eliis from Compass Box with us. He is the brand ambassador sales guy for Western North America. And we've also
I want that t-shirt, by the way. I want that t-shirt that says brand ambassador sales guy.
Oh, yeah, that's a good t-shirt.
Yeah,
I don't know what my t-shirt would say. Scotch guy, doodle dad,
pretty much. I think you just nailed it.
I think those would be the three key takeaways. If you're a South Park fan, you'd of course add the word victim to the end of that, because that's part of everyone's brand. But no, we won't go down that road. So before we get rolling, I know we've still got a few people to join us. Just a quick rehash. We have some events coming up. I'm going to skip the Craig Illicky one that's coming up next week because it's almost sold out. But we've got a bunch of Scotch Malt Whiskey Societies, both virtual and in-store, coming to a Kensington Wine Market and or computer screen near you. So those are coming up in the days ahead. What else have we got? Mezcal and cookies with Harmony here at the shop. There's still a few spots left for the High West virtual tasting. Harmony, do we know who's hosting that? Has that been just somebody, a human?
Austin is gonna co-host that with me. He's the brand ambassador for the brand. So.
Cool. His last name's not Powers, is it?
Pardon?
His last name's not Powers, is it?
No, it is not. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but I know it is not Powers.
Sweet. So that's also coming up. And then we did drop some newer tastings. I'll just scroll down. Well, we added space to the Gordon MacPhail tasting. Where is it there? With Richard Urquhart, because it's sold out. We launched these two dark beauties in the middle yesterday. You definitely want to check those out. What else is worth noting? The Ben Romick is pretty new. Where's the Ben Romick? It's way down here past Ardbeg Day and everything. I'm going to update that photo, but we've got two 40-year-olds, 4 Ben Romick single casks. I think it's 4, and the new Contrast Bordeaux, which is coming out. James, did I miss anything? Did I get them all? Was there another one?
Oh boy, yeah. 4 single casks, 2 contrasts, 2 40s.
Huh. I don't know why that says 5 single casks. I might have to look at.
Oh, you know what? One of the contrasts is cask strength, so it kind of halfway.
There you go. So anyway, there are 8 Benromics. Other cool things coming up. I think most of you know where to find the tasting schedule or schedule, if you will. I tend to say the latter, but I get scolded by everyone for using that version of the word. Scott, you grimaced at that. Are you a schedule or a schedule guy?
Well, I'm bilingual. I mean, I speak both, British and American. So I think I'm trying to remember which is which. So I've been over here in the US for about half my life now. So I think English would be the schedule, and maybe American would be the schedule, but I may be the wrong way around. Who cares?
Who does care, indeed. So we're starting off with Juveniles. I love Juveniles. This is a whiskey we've not had for ages now, although, not to tell tales out of school, but this bottle might have been found on a dusty shelf, and that's how we were able to include it in tonight's tasting. But this is a really cool whiskey. It's named for a restaurant wine bar in Paris. I had the honor of actually attending the launch of this particular bottling way back when in Paris. I think it coincided with Whiskey Live one year. It's a gorgeous whiskey, and one minor little detail, which was pretty cool. All the bottles had a little bell at the bottom of them, which is fun. I mean,
I think this was one of the biggest limited editions we ever did. I think it was close to 15,000 bottles, and each bell was glued into the bottle of the bottom of the bottle.
who had to do that?
Not me.
Summer students?
I would, maybe John's son. Yeah, it's
I mean,
possible. But
Compass
yeah.
Box
So yeah, the bell.
sort of
If
company
you
that
look
would
at the
have-
label.
Oh,
If
sorry,
you
go
look
ahead.
at the label, the gesture is upside down, so the bell in the front of the bottle is actually the top of the jester's hat.
Oh, look, how about that? He's got quite a large hat.
Yeah, he does, doesn't he?
Yeah. But
Yeah.
gorgeous whiskey. I can vouch that it tastes or pairs well with foie gras, because that is something that they do have over in that part of the world. I think they outlawed it in your, did they outlaw it in your part of the world?
I think it was outlawed for a minute, but I think it might have come back. Anyway, you can still get duck pate. I mean,
Just don't use that word foie.
right.
Well,
So
Scott,
I love Juveniles. Yeah, so thanks Andrew for setting that up. Yeah, Juveniles. So John and the owner of Juveniles is actually an Englishman, Tim. And so John and Tim, I think they struck up a relationship only like a couple years after John started Compass Box in 2000. So and I think the one you're drinking right now is maybe the third Juveniles whiskey we produced. Definitely the second, but maybe the third. And so
it must be the third, because the first two I don't think went out. I don't think the first two came to Canada. I think it was only the third.
yeah. I mean, I think the first two were very small productions. Maybe a couple hundred bottles on the very first one, something like that. So, but I remember. So I think this was about 2018. This came out. But I remember. So Tim came over to London, or he gave John the brief for the whiskey. And he said that you wanted a whiskey that you could drink as an aperitif before a meal, or would pair really well with cheese after a meal. And it should have some whimsy. That was literally the brief behind it. So yeah, it's a blended malt. So all single malts, there's no grain in there. Obviously Clynelish, because, at that point of the company, we basically lived on Clynelish. But yeah, I really feel like this is a whiskey, maybe because we produce 15,000 bottles instead of 6,000 bottles or whatever. But this is such a fun, beautiful, oily, fruity, just delicious whiskey. It's pears and melons and it's such a beautiful whiskey, and it's got that lovely just Clynelish waxy mouthfeel to it as well.
It also came in a bottle that we've not seen you use very often at Compass Box. In fact, two of the other occasions that I can think of that you used it were for the Whiskey du Table, which I believe were exclusives for La Maison de Whiskey. I don't know if that was before you joined Compass Box, Scott, but those were whiskeys I desperately wanted for my shop, because it was taking the concept of table wine, like the base level of French wine, and then applying it to Compass Box? Like, what is Compass
Yeah,
Box?
whiskey du table. No, I was with Compass Box. I've had over 8 years with Compass Box now. Can you believe that? Um, so yeah, whiskey du table. It was designed as exactly like a table wine. It was like youngish whiskeys. I think like 3, 4, 5, 6-year-old kind of whiskeys, and it was lower ABV. And the whole idea was that it was almost, you know, an aperitif style whiskey or a session whiskey, if you will. And we even talked about actually distributing it in the US and possibly Canada and other markets as well. We just didn't feel that maybe there was like enough education around what a table wine was, you know, and we, you know, we thought it might just kind of confuse a lot of people. We weren't sure it would be that much of a success, so that was the main reason we kind of didn't distribute it nationally. But yeah, I think we did about like 2 or 3 versions for Le Maison du Whiskey, but it was just sold solely through those guys as well.
Well, if you ever do something like that in the future, I'd probably be interested. Not that we could ever move a large volume of it, but I just love the like counterculture edge to that, where you're doing something that at least at the time was going against the grain of everyone's trying to produce something premium and luxurious, and it was still a good product, but it still had that Compass Box aesthetic to it, but it wasn't, you know, trying to be something that it was not, and you know, very transparent.
By that Compass Box aesthetic, you mean Klein Leash?
Well, good. It was elegant. I mean, Scott, I don't know about you, but like I've tried a lot of very bad 3 to 5-year-old whiskeys, and you know, that's not really in the Compass Box wheelhouse to bottle something that.
No. It's, I mean, it kind of goes back. It was when it was, yeah, it was after we'd started aging our own new make spirit Compass Box. So I know it's not in the tasting we're doing today, but if any of you have tried Orchard House before, this one with the bright yellow green label right here, that's essentially made up of mostly about 8-year-old single malts, but these are whiskeys that we've aged ourselves since the day they came off the still. Yeah. So back in 2013, we started going to like a handful of our favorite distilleries: Klein Leash, Ben Rinnes, Cameron Bridge, Kalila, maybe Glen Elgin, Glen Ord, you know, some of these whiskeys, and going to them with barrels that we've actually like, they're new American oak barrels, and we've seasoned them with grain whiskey for a year to pull that first punch of all that vanilla-ness out of them. And then we're going back to these distilleries and saying, hey, can you fill them with new make spirit? And we're going to age them ourselves. And so a lot of the whiskeys in the whiskey du tables were actually whiskeys that we'd been aging ourselves, rather than going to distilleries and saying like, hey, do you have any 4-year-old whiskey you can sell us? And I imagine most distilleries would be like, what do you want 4-year-old whiskey for? But because, you know, we're so specific in the casks that we use at Compass Box, we really are more than just blenders. I mean, we nerd out a lot on the barrels. And so yeah, you can, you know, take the edges off a whiskey in a short amount of time, and you still want to let the distillate, you know, show through. Certainly in a whiskey that age is going to be distillate driven rather than cask driven. But, you know, depending on, you know, the type of wood you use and you know, the char and all these types of things, you can still, you know, make something that's fun and drinkable for sure. So I feel we're getting a little off track on Juveniles though. What's everyone's opinion
I was going to say, maybe
Juveniles?
I should pipe in. I think the key thing maybe we're missing here is why we put this in. I definitely have a few reasons. I'm sure, Scott, like you, there was a few years there where, you know, before Orchard House existed, Juveniles was like the lead off dram. You know, if you didn't do hedonism, like Juveniles was kind of like the way you started all your tastings.
Yeah.
Because you're right, it tastes like white wine, right? Like you can tell John created it to be like white wine. But the bigger reason I put it in here, other than I like for you to have to fish on that shelf behind you, I think that's fun, is the ingredient, one of the ingredients here being Balmenic, which of course leads into the next whiskey. And now, like, you guys are pumping through that stuff, but historically, that was kind of an odd malt to show up in a Compass Box.
Yeah, it's, I mean, our supply has moved around over the years, right? I mean, there are, I know, a handful of companies that own probably 98% of the distilleries in Scotland, right? Diageo being key, and Bacardi and Pernod Ricard and so forth. Maybe 98% is a little too high, but probably 90% of the industry is owned by the big guys. And we've never really been like tied to a distillery because of the name. Right, we don't just use Clynelish because people know Clynelish or know it for a certain type of thing. We only use Clynelish in our whiskies because that particular Clynelish that we're using, whether it's a 10-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 15-year-old, whatever, is giving us the right flavor profile and mouthfeel and all of those wonderful things that we're looking for. So Balmenic has appeared more recently over the years, and it's just because it's it gives us the flavor profile. I mean, if there was the distillery out there that none of us had ever heard of before, but it gave us the right flavor profile that we were looking for, we would happily switch out Macallan for it and use that distillery if Macallan got turned off, which we don't use Macallan very often. But so I mean, to be completely honest, like the names on the distilleries we use at Compass Box, we're not married to them because of their reputation. We're only using them because of the quality of the whiskey. And if that whiskey becomes unavailable, we will happily, sub in a lesser known distillery's whiskey without even thinking about it.
To build on your point, Scott, I think you could add to that you're not trading on the name of the components. That's part of the transparency. You're comfortable telling people what's in there. It's about the fact that it's Clynelish or Balmenic. It's just you're happy to be honest with people about what you're using to create the whiskey.
It's this crazy philosophy that you should know what you're putting in your body, right? It's just insane. But it always kind of makes me laugh because everyone's like, wow, you guys are so transparent and we love that. And that's such a great thing. But when you think about it, it's really easy to be the good guys when everyone else out there is being shady.
Yeah.
Right.
Or just taking the path of least resistance, which is most people don't care. So why would we bother telling them, or going to the trouble of putting it on a website with details that they can search, or answering their email question for more information if they directly ask you for something. Like, no one else is doing that because that takes effort and it takes people and time, and all of that is money.
Yeah, and I mean, don't get me wrong, like if you're selling 5 million cases of a certain brand every year, you've probably got to chop and change that recipe around a lot, even during the 1 year, because of supply and so forth like that. So, there's a reason why the big brands might not be so transparent, because their recipe is constantly changing just out of necessity, right? Because the brand is way bigger than any single distillery can support. So there is that. But yeah, Compass Box we've always been built on integrity as much as anything else. Integrity and delicious whiskey pretty much is what Compass Box has been about. And having fun as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think James was intending us to segue off into
Art and Decadence. Yeah, Art and Decadence. This is fantastic.
I left it open for you, Andrew.
Well, what is a Balmenic, James? Should we go into that or just focus on?
Well, I do recall, Scott, I don't know, I don't think you were on this one, but when we had James Saxon on hosting, Andrew asked him the question, is there an equivalent, like the way that John loves Clynelish? And he right away, didn't hesitate. He said, yeah, I love Balmenic. That's my muse.
I honestly wasn't aware of that, but no, I'd love to hear that. Yeah, I mean, James is incredibly talented. He's got a spectacular palate. He's so good at what he does. He was good when he started with Compass Box, and the 5 years he's had working with John. I mean, he's absolutely the heir apparent to take over the whiskey making side of the business. Yeah, and he has an incredible knowledge of the industry as well. I mean, John and James, I don't know if everyone here knows it. John Glazer obviously started Compass Box. James Saxon has taken over all the whiskey making duties at Compass Box recently. John and James actually met when James was the head of the Whiskey Society at St. Andrew's College. And he invited John Glazer to go up there in I don't know, 2013, 2014, something like that, to go up and give a talk. And that's when John and James kind of started their friendship. So they've known each other for a long time. and they're almost, when James started at Compass Box, our little internal joke was we nicknamed him Little John because there are so many similarities between him and John as well. So but yeah, moving on. So Art and Decadence, the next whiskey, is this the most recent limited edition you guys have had up there?
Correct. Yeah.
It
And
is.
sadly gone, but it was the
Well,
most recent.
Yeah,
This one was unexpectedly very, very popular here.
It's such a great whiskey. It really is. It's some of our whiskeys get like all the you know, the awards and all the recognition and everything, and we've got so many limited editions over the years that have kind of snuck under the radar, a little bit like Juveniles, a little bit like this as well. So the whole concept behind Art and Decadence was we wanted to make that big, extravagant, rich after dinner whiskey. So going back to the Bolmenic, a few years ago, we took a parcel of malt whiskey from Bolmenic, and we re-racked it into 3 different dessert wine casks in Marsala, Sauterne, and Madeira casks. And what we've done in Art and Decadence is we've brought all 3 of those whiskeys back into the blend, along with some other bits and pieces as well. But we didn't just want to make, you know, like a PX finish or a Madeira finish or so forth, because we're Compass Box, right? That would be way too easy. So, but yeah, that's what Art and Decadence is all about. You know, a lot of people ask me, I get asked all the time, like, what comes first, like the idea or the whiskey? And it varies with Compass Box. Sometimes, you know, we'll come up with a whiskey and then we'll, you know, fit like an idea around it, and other times it's the idea first, and then we make the whiskey. And this was idea first, and then we went out and we kind of put the whiskey together to fit it. But yeah, Art and Decadence, I mean, that's what it is. It's big, it's rich, it's sweet, it's decadent, it's all of those things.
Yeah, it's very rich, quite peppery. And you can see some of those different influence coming in there, like the wine cask, the Sauterne, the Madeira, Marsala. It's got a really nice kind of rich, fleshy profile, and you can tell it's heavy on the malt. Like I don't have the spider graph in front of me here, but oh, actually I do. There we go.
There you go.
For you. Because the Port Dundas is, you know, it's what, about a third, quarter?
What does it say there? Yeah, 20%?
Yeah, 20%.
20%.
So,
And then there is a blended Scotch parcel at the top, a little one, but yeah.
So yeah,
yeah.
It's interesting because I think some people could very easily miss out on the fact that this is a blend at all, because that grain element is just the richness of all that Balmenic and all that different wine casking kind of hides that. I think the grain is adding a little softness to the whiskey, but it's not really kind of shining through, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
No, we've often described like adding a small amount of grain whiskey to you know, malt whiskey is, I think I used to describe it as like the soft pillow on which like the malt whiskey lays its head.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's a blended Scotch. Everyone will be like, oh, it's a blended Scotch, but this is what, 22% grain and so 78% malt. But maybe without that grain, it wouldn't have that just kind of little bit of elegance to it, right? It may just be a little too punchy without the grain whiskey.
Yeah, I've at least, especially with the higher end blends, I've always seen the grain components in them, or they've often seemed like a way of softening the spirit a little, adding a bit of elegance. You know, it's not about thinning it out or
No.
having a base, like a very neutral base to build on. They're a thought out component of it, as opposed to just something that you layer more interesting things on top of to create a profile.
I mean, they can have that lovely creamy richness, but it's a totally different type of richness than you're getting from the malt whiskeys here, right? It's more kind of like a French pastry richness, as opposed to like with this particular whiskey, you're getting those big dessert wine style richness. So it's a much softer kind of richness. So yeah, it really does kind of, in a way, you know, just as you say, like it softens it and makes it a little bit more gentle and pleasing. Honestly, there's, you know, grain whiskey can be a wonderful, wonderful thing if it's aged long enough in good high quality barrels, you know.
Which could be a segue into hedonism, but I guess we're not going to talk about that until later this year or early next year.
When are you guys getting your hedonism? Is it soon?
It's not even on the water yet.
Oh,
You're
that's a
But
shocking
spoiler
shame.
alert, we're already Andrew and I are already conspiring for a great hedonism /
Shocking.
extinct blends tasting in the fall.
Mhm.
This is a beautiful, beautiful whiskey. It's absolutely fantastic. I'm excited for you guys to get your hands on it. I'll reach out to your ordering people tomorrow, James, and give them a swift boot.
Scott,
Wow.
did you order a print of the artwork?
No, I didn't. It's a beautiful picture. It did actually kind of cross my mind for a minute. It did. I mean,
I
for
thought the
200
price was very
pounds,
fair.
for 200 pound, that would be a stunning addition to anyone's house. I mean, it's absolutely beautiful.
So
Um,
James, did you order one?
No, alas, I did not. I'm going to use the excuse that I don't want to take one away from a slightly
Very
more
nice.
diehard Compass Box fan,
Very
yeah,
nice.
I mean, yeah, I think
of
sharing,
which there may be one or two on this tasting.
Oh,
I
for
hope
sure.
so.
I'm going to use the excuse that I'm lazy and then frugal when it comes to stuff like that. Also, I'm not sure if my wife would want it in the house, like if it would be her thing.
Pictures of other women.
Yeah. No, just because as soon as she found out it was related to whiskey, she'd not be keen on it. So, because there's already enough of that crap in the home. To be fair,
And you can't drink a picture.
well, she doesn't drink the whiskey either, so that's maybe part of it. But
Fair
anyway,
enough.
we have a well-stocked wine fridge. Let me just leave it at that. Well, the Art and Decadence is lovely. All gone, I'm afraid. Metropolis also all gone. Although, as James said, I've held back a bottle of each of so far the first 3 releases in the Extinct Blends Quartet because I want to do a tasting with all of them together.
Love that.
In my heart, actually, what I really want to do, though the laws will not allow us to do this, unfortunately, in this country, is I would love to acquire at auction a bottle of each of the blends that inspired the Lost Blends creations, but we're not allowed to have quite that much fun on this side of the.
Yeah, so for those of you that aren't familiar on the call, so Metropolis whiskey number 3 is actually the 3rd installment in what we're calling the Extinct Blends Quartet. This is Metropolis here. This is actually number 4, Celestial, which again should be with you guys later on this year. The whole program was designed around an homage or a cover version, if you will, of classic blended Scotch brands where either the brand is not around anymore, it's been discontinued, or the recipe has changed so much over the years that what you're getting today in the bottle is not really reminiscent of the brand when it was in its heyday. So Metropolis is actually based on a brand called Bailey Nickel Jarvie. Did you guys get this brand up in Canada? Because no one in the US has ever heard of it before.
I've only seen it at auction. I don't recall it being available over here, but
Yeah,
I've never seen it in Canada.
I
Even
don't.
at auction.
I mean, growing up in England, I don't even remember seeing it in England, but it did exist. I ran into a guy who actually used to sell it a couple of weeks ago at an event and everything, and call it BNJ is what they call it in the industry. But it used to be owned by Glenmorangie, and then other people before that and so forth. But Metropolis, yeah, it was a blended Scotch. It was particularly popular during like the 30s and 40s and 50s. And it was a blend of Islay, Speyside, and then Lowland grain whiskey. And so there you go, BNJ. What we're trying to do with these whiskeys is say we're not just trying to recreate them, copy the recipe, so forth. We're as I say, we're trying to do a cover version, elevate it, using even older whiskeys, taking it to a whole other direction. But Bailey Nickel Jarvie was kind of the inspiration behind what is Metropolis. There's all the marketing bumps there and so forth, but it's a lovely whiskey. I mean, it's lightly peated. I think the original Bailey Nickel Jarvie Lagavulin was the peated component. We didn't use Lagavulin. I believe we used is it Lefroy or is it Kalila that's in there?
Oh, I've not put that spidergraph, unfortunately, on our website.
I would have to go. Yeah, we didn't actually put the recipes on the back of these bottles. Like
Scott,
we do a
I'm
lot
on
of.
it. I'm on
No,
the
there's Bowmore.
Bowmore. Oh,
Yeah.
well, I like that.
You want me to share it?
I've got it here, James. I've got the spidergraph. I've pulled her
Okay.
up. It's coming. Sure.
But yeah, so there are much, much older, better whiskeys than were in the regular Bailey Nickel Jarvie. For those of you that aren't familiar with the graphic that's on the screen right now, this is on our website, available for anyone to download. It's obviously, you know, we're breaking down the recipe by the different distillery components. We say on there the type of barrel, the percentage of each, you know, whether it's a malt, whether it's a grain, the flavor profile. But if you count the tree rings out from the middle of each component, that will give you an idea on the age of that particular component. It would be illegal for me to actually say that is the age of each particular component, but I think we can all agree that it's pretty darn close to how old each component is. So, but yeah, Metropolis. So this is how blended, you know, this is closer to how blended Scotch would have tasted 50, 80, 100 years ago than what you see on the market today. Essentially, that's what we're trying to do here. You know, use the style of those whiskeys, but then just elevate it, lift it to like another level as well. Compass box it, if you will. I firmly believe compass box should be a verb. To compass box something. It should be a verb. And that's the whole idea with Metropolis there. It's a beautiful whiskey. I think blended scotches have a bad rap for a very good reason. But there can be some absolutely spectacular blended scotches out there, and the more I drink the whiskey, the more I find myself gravitating towards the blended scotches. You know, they're just a little easier to drink sometimes. I love a good single malt, but you know, when you just maybe want to sit back and you know, you don't want that just so much you get from a single malt. Sometimes blended scotches can it's just like a nice cardigan.
I've said on multiple occasions, I do mean this with the most sincerity. Compass Box, I think, can take a lot of credit for making blended whiskeys sexy again, but not just sexy. I mean, that's sort of underselling it, making them relevant. Because the trajectory in the mid to late 2000s where single malts were taking off, like blends did have at that point, I'd say, quite a negative connotation to them. And I think you can say that a lot of companies got complacent. The brands became commoditized. They kind of felt like, you know, they could do whatever they wanted. They didn't need to try anymore. And, you know, we're starting to see some of that even with some of the big Cadillac brand single malts now, where the market is slowed and all of a sudden they're realizing they have to try again. Like, people aren't just going to buy it because they recognize the name. Like, they've pushed the prices so high and they've taken the consumer for granted. And I think that's going to cause some ructions or whatever. Like, there's going to be some changes made to how things are done because, you know, consumers eventually figure it out. And I think that's what happened to blends. They figured it out that they were kind of boring and stale.
100%. I think, Jeff, you and I should be friends. Yeah. No, nail on the head there. Absolutely, Andrew. I mean, that's a big reason why John started Compass Box back in 2000, because he'd spent 5 years at Johnny Walker, and he thought that Scotch whiskey could be so much more than it was back in 2000. And that's literally why he quit that job and started Compass Box, to make Scotch interesting and fun and relevant, and you know, try some new things and take some risks and innovate and experiment. And where the industry wasn't doing any of those things, it was really just, you know, stuck in a rut, sitting on its laurels. And so I would easily argue that the Compass Box, we've had a bigger effect, I think, on the overall Scotch industry than we see ourselves in terms of sales, but that we are generally given credit for.
Well, you know, I generally agree with Jeff in terms of some of them not even trying. Some companies like Dewar's, as one example, has made an effort to put better products out there, and I think not in any small part inspired by what Compass Box was doing with their whiskeys. Maybe not on the branding end of things, but certainly on the creating interesting liquids, but also being more transparent about them. Maybe not as transparent, but more transparent, because there's not many big blending firms that tell you how old their whiskeys are.
They've done a great job with the double doubles in particular, right? That's probably what you're referring to. Yeah. But yeah, they've done some experimenting. They've tried to make blended scotches interesting again, and kudos to them for doing that as well. It's it's just like, you know, most industries, there's a cycle to it, right? There's a life cycle. There's a boom and a bust life cycle, and you know, things go up and something else comes in and becomes popular and knocks you off the pedestal. But blended scotch, if I was a betting man, if I could buy stocks in the blended scotch category, I think here in the next 10, 20 odd years, it can only go back up. You know, there's so much potential for it. It's the value whiskey right
They're
now.
gonna have a lot. They're gonna have a lot more components to work with as well.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of whiskey out there shortly. Yes.
Scott, do you ever read those comments talking about how, you know, the Scotch whiskey business is kind of hedging that they'll be able to get into the Indian market like they haven't in the past? And I'm sure you're like me. I always read that and I think I kind of hope they don't.
Well, I mean, the Southeast Asian market has been a big Scotch market for a long, long time. And certainly the Indian market is very big for Scotch already. It's not like they're trying to get into Scotch. I believe Johnny Walker isn't the largest Scotch brand in the world. There's another one out there. I forget the name of it. And it's huge in India.
Yeah. I think it's
and in other parts of Asia. It's that's why. So
I think there's a lot of tariffs. If you were trying to sell, for instance, just Compass Box or, you know, just basic OB malt whiskeys in India, I think you're slapped with a lot of tariffs, and they're working on eliminating that because they think it would be an explosion that might suck up a lot of the extra volume.
But I don't. So people have been talking about this for a decade.
Yeah,
and it's gotten no closer. And what's happening?
Well, now there might be more incentive, Andrew.
I don't think there's more incentive, because you think about it from the Indians' perspective, like there's more and more producers cropping up in India. Why wouldn't they protect those producers? Why are they going to make it easier for foreign companies to sell there? Like, I just don't see the argument. Like, the Indian companies can produce them cheaper. They can come up like very, very quickly. Most of what they're drinking is very low quality, but there's this growing movement of like malt distilleries and blends companies. I honestly don't think it's going to happen. I don't think the Indian government's going to turn over and just let the Scotch whiskey industry in and taking market share, because they want that whiskey produced in their own country. They want all of the value produced there. And I don't think the Scotch whiskey industry has a cudgel big enough to convince them to change.
Well, they're not part of the EU anymore, so there's that. So, but I just saw a good question that came up. Do you think we're going to start seeing blended scotches made with, or blended whiskies made from whiskies from different countries? I think you absolutely could. I know Beam Suntory a couple of years ago came out with a whiskey that was part Japanese, part American, part Scottish. It didn't blow anyone's socks off, but they did that. I think a lot of that pretty much comes down to the producer. It's going to come from like one of the big corporate global, you know, corporations where they have distilleries in all these different countries and so forth like that.
The problem is, though, is you can't call that Japanese whiskey or Scotch.
No, it's just whiskey. It's you know.
And I do want to add another quick, completely not related to Compass Box argument to this. The boutique whiskey company actually came up with the World Blend concept first. Suntory copied it. They came out with what they called their World Blend. And it was about 5 to 6 months later that Suntory's AO came out. And they're still saying it was the world's first world blend, but it wasn't. Although I suppose you could say Japanese blends, period, were the world's first world blend, but that's a whole different story.
I mean, you could possibly say, if you believe the Irish, you say the Scottish are the first world's blends, because the Irish invented distilling. And I mean, is there a first anything?
Who knows? Anyway, the Metropolis is lovely. I love how you can detect the Bowmore, even though it's a really small piece of the puzzle in that. And it's,
you know how you know if someone drinks Scotch? They pronounce it Bowmore. It's not Bowmore.
No,
it's Bowmore.
Bowmore, yeah. Well, it's like, it's Calgary. You know, it's not Calgary.
Right. Yeah, you don't go to New Orleans. You go to New Orleans.
Yeah. But anyway, lovely, lovely blend. Really nice addition to that trio, which so far I've been really impressed with all three of them. And
the fourth one doesn't disappoint either, just so you know. It just got released here, and it's called Celestial. It's this bottle right here. It's essentially, it's based on the White Horse blended Scotch, so it's the peatiest of the four. And it's got Ardbeg and Kalila in it, I think. And if any of you had the
Yeah, and
original No
Pulteney.
Name whiskey, it's the same parcel of whiskey that the first No Name was based around from Ardbeg.
And coincidentally, the Kensington Wine Market 30th anniversary.
Yeah,
I teed that right up for you, didn't I?
you did. Sadly, that's long gone too. We'll have to wait and hope and see if in 2-3 years time there's a 35th anniversary blend, but we won't get our cart ahead of the horses here. Glasgow, Scott, we've got a trio of Glasgows to try now.
Yeah. So Glasgow Blend, out of our regular lineup, which is these whiskeys up here, I drink more Glasgow Blend than anything. I love this whiskey. So I heard John Glazer describe this about a year and a half ago. I'd never heard him say this before, but he described it in a staff training to a bunch of bartenders before as Johnny Walker Black dialed up to 12. He said he'd always wanted to make his version of Johnny Black. And for those of you that haven't had Johnny Black, it's a peated, sherried, blended Scotch. That's the whole kind of concept behind it. So this is peated and sherried, but it's way more peated and way more sherried and way more malt as well. It's 65% malt, so only 35% grain. The whole idea with Glasgow Blend and its sister whiskey, Artist Blend, was we were trying to make blended scotches in the old style, when blended scotches were the most popular, spirit drunk in the world, where they were mostly malt whiskey and some grain whiskey, right? So yeah, that's where the 65-35 kind of split comes in this whiskey. And I absolutely adore this whiskey. So this is 43% whiskey. Now, the way we make Glasgow Blend and Artist Blend, because this will inform the next two whiskeys as well. So we take all the whiskeys as per the recipe that's on the website, whether you got it or not. And the peated component is Laphroaig, by the way. The sherried Highland malt kind of moves around. It has been Crugellicky. It may be Ben Rinners now. I kind of forget. But it's a young Laphroaig is the peated component. So we'll take all the cask strength whiskeys. We'll put them in a vat as per the proportions on the website. Then what we'll do is we will water them back to 100 proof, 50% alcohol, and then we'll put the blend back into the individual component whiskeys casks to marry for usually around 12 to 18 months. Then for the regular whiskey, the first whiskey you're drinking right now, we'll then put all those different marrying casks back together in the vat, revat them for a second time, and then drop the proof down to 43% and bottle, filter and bottle. That's what you're drinking right now. And I dare anyone, and this is you as well, Andrew, you own a fantastic whiskey shop. Is there a better whiskey? Is there a more complex whiskey on your shelves for around about the same price as this bottle?
I'd be hard pressed to point them out. It's great value. And I love it, but this is one of those ones where you start running up against biases. And unless you've got like a bar cocktail culture that's really excited about stuff like this, you'll get people saying, well, I can get a single malt for that price. There's not many, mind you, but
you can, but you cannot get a single malt that has this complexity of like different flavor profiles in it.
And I would agree with you on that. It's just that segment of the market, I think, is sometimes hard to convince because they want what they want or they want what they think they want.
Sure.
And
yeah,
it's not like I don't think you have a number of those people on the call tonight. Like I think most of the people on this are the people that have drank the Kool-Aid. They love the blended malts. They're, if something's good, they're willing to spend somewhere between $80 and a couple $100 or more. But it's that segment below that I think is kind of a challenge. We've had at times more success with the single marrying casks because I know that's a segue and I'm not trying to push it to that too quickly, because we can pin those or we can target those at single malt drinkers because they get the idea behind it. But it's a great whiskey, but I think it's something that for at least my shop, it struggles because people are spoiled for choice. But you're right, for dollars, this is phenomenal whiskey. And I'd take this over Johnny Walker Black any day.
Oh yeah, and I don't have a problem with Johnny Black. Johnny Black is a perfectly fine whiskey. It really is. But this is just so much more expressive. You
Mhm.
know, it's really and so the reason. So those of you that aren't that familiar with Compass Box, so we marry all of our blends. Every single bottle you see behind me, the whiskey in this bottle, we don't just vat everything, blend it, and then send it to the bottling line. Every single bottle, every single whiskey we've produced, over 150 now, we always put the blend back into generally a cask to marry. We want to let the different components get to know each other, right? I'm sure just about everyone in this call has cooked chili at one point or other in their life, right? You know, you never eat chili right off the stove. You know, you let it cool down, you throw it in the freezer, you freeze it, you take it back out, and then you heat it back up and eat it, right? Because it just tastes so much better because you've got that one chili flavor. If you eat it straight off the stove, you've got the meat and the beans and the tomatoes and the whatever else you got in there. But it's not chili necessarily. But throw it in the fridge, freeze it, bring it back out, heat it back up, then you've got chili. And that's what the marrying is all about. It just makes a better whiskey. And with this one in particular, you've got that young peated, that young Lafroig, and that slightly older, probably around about 12-year-old Highland, sherried single malt, as well as the grain whiskey and a couple other bits. There's some French oak finish whiskey in there and stuff like that. And they need time to get to know each other. And that's what the marrying is all about. It really does make a difference, letting those whiskeys sit and just meld before you bottle them. It produces, a better quality whiskey. It's
Mhm.
expensive, but it makes the best whiskey, and that's what we've always been about at Compass Box.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm definitely a fan of, whether it's, I mean, obviously you can't do, well, there's no point doing it with single casks, but with even single malts or other whiskeys, that marrying period is crucial because when you mix all that stuff together, like it's kind of shocked, right? Like it needs time to settle down and become a homogeneous or
Yeah.
you know what I'm trying, I don't know why that word is escaping me right now. But yeah, it's not going to just become what it should be in a hurry. Sometimes some of these things take time.
Yeah,
And
I'm actually just going to grab a bowl myself and join you all.
yeah, because like just as an example, like anyone who's been to Macallan and Macallan puts their whiskeys back into marrying casks before they're bottled. I mean, that's a pretty common practice, I think, with a lot of the best brands. James, I'm interested for your take. Like, I think this is great, but like for the market, I mean, you see other parts of the market, you see all kinds of retailers, but you also deal to an extent with on trade. Like, how does this one work for our market?
Yeah, I think what I've noticed, when we started selling Compass Box, when I started with the company, we kind of had this sense that like we needed to convince bartenders to make Scotch cocktails, and that was going to be like our path to glory, and that it would kind of trickle down from that. And I don't think that really played out. And I just think that unfortunately, well, fortunately or unfortunately, I mean, the cocktail culture with brown spirits in Canada has just been centered more around bourbon.
It's the same
And
down here, trust
yeah,
me.
of course, right? And
Yeah,
and I think
it's
that's okay. So I think that that has kind of like put a bit of a shadow over the artists in Glasgow Blend. We still do decent numbers with them. And obviously the whiskey's amazing and the people that follow it love it and respect it. And there's places like Clive's in Victoria that like, I mean, he's had a artist or Glasgow Blend on his menu for like 10 years in a row,
Mhm.
right? There are people that get it. But
Yeah.
but yeah, it's unfortunately, I think it's, for those of us that may keep a bottle or two around to make a good cocktail, a Scotch-based cocktail at home, thank God there's Glasgow and Artist Blend. I think that's
Mhm.
my take.
that was the whole reason behind us creating these whiskeys is there wasn't a good Scotch whiskey out there that you could make cocktails with. I mean, we created these whiskeys for bars and restaurants essentially. I mean, obviously we sell them in retail, but the whole idea was bars and restaurants first and foremost. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I really like highballs, Scott. I don't know. Do you ever drink highballs
I
at home?
drink I drink more highballs probably than any other cocktail these days.
What's your recipe?
It's whiskey and soda water.
Hmm.
You can be more specific.
And depending if it's my first one, it's probably the right amount of whiskey and soda water. If it's my second one, it's a little bit more whiskey, and then if it's a third one, it's just it's going downhill pretty quick at that point, or uphill.
It's funny, like I enjoy, like I've enjoyed whiskey and soda when I've had them. I know for a while, like, and I don't know if it's still the case, but I know there was a trend for a while in London where you'd go into bars and you could get whiskey and soda on tap. Like it was already mixed.
Yeah.
They were doing it with Tokyo, with Japanese whiskey there for quite a while. They were putting the systems in bars and stuff like that.
They had Ben Romick Traditional or something, and soda at that one, what is it, Milroy's had them on tap there one time. But for me, I've always loved, like, I like boozier cocktails. I like things like Blood and Sand. I mean, that's what I would kind of put this into.
Which Glasgow makes a great Blood and Sand.
Yeah.
That's what I really like about Glasgow. It's got the peated whiskey, right? You can't, it's very, very obviously got that. Young Lafroig is not shy. But if you mix it in like some of those boozy stirred cocktails, with a lot of times with sweet vermouth, the peated component really kind of goes to the background instead of the foreground. It's a really versatile whiskey to use. You can create cocktails with this where the peat really shines through, but there are ways of really sending the peat to the background in the cocktail with this whiskey as well.
All right. Glasgow Marrying Casks. So
I was. Oh, go on, Andrew. This is your whiskey.
We've got our third, which was the point for tonight's tasting. But like, remind me, why? Like, did this all start out as an effort to kind of bring some more attention to the artist blend and the Glasgow blend? Is that where it started?
Honestly, why we started doing the Marrying Casks? I mean, they're our version of like a private barrel, right? Every bourbon company is selling private barrels these days. Every retailer's got one. A lot of them are fantastic. Scotch brands, there are a few Scotch brands over the years have done some single barrel programs, but they're usually very, very kind of usually on the more expensive side of things. But there wasn't a blended Scotch company out there doing any kind of like, single cask, single barrel program. So I thought that the uniqueness of the program has always been legitimately excellent. And the differentiation on the different Marrying Casks. So for those of you that haven't had one of these before, what we're doing with the Marrying Cask program is the Glasgow blend is exactly the same recipe as the whiskey we just tasted. And I mentioned that after we vat everything, we blend it, we drop the proof down to 50% alcohol, we put them back into those the original component casks. So some of the whiskey will go back into like the sherried Highland cask, some of it will go into the Lowland grain whiskey cask, some of it will go into a Clynelish cask that's an ex-bourbon barrel, some of it might go into the the Lafroig cask and stuff like that. And then instead of blending all those casks together, we're just picking one of those casks. So the recipe is exactly the same in all these casks, but to see how different the whiskey is, depending on if it's spent like 12 months in just the sherry butt or the ex-bourbon barrel or the grain barrel, it really does make a big, big difference in the whiskey. And it's kind of striking to when you taste them side by side to see how much just that 12 months in that barrel really does change the whiskey. It's really, really cool. And you have to forgive me, Andrew, I completely forgot to click the links on the 2021. I believe I remember what the 2024 cask is, but the 2021, you'll have to remind me on that one.
Well, fortunately, we have the power of the internet at our fingertips, so I can pull that up here for us. The other thing,
what was that you just called it? The inter what?
The interweb.
I'll have to look. I'll get on Google and check that out.
That thing that Al Gore created, way back when.
Damn hippie.
So people will notice too, we still have actually a little over a dozen bottles of this, and since we've got the new one in, I just put this on sale. So if you want a really good deal, that's
an unbelievable deal.
Yeah,
it's so good.
But here's the recipe.
Do you ship to the US?
Pardon me?
Do you ship to the US?
No.
Asking for a friend.
But I can hang on to one. That's something that can always be sorted on another level. But 38% Cameron Bridge first fill bourbon. So this is the standard recipe.
Yeah.
Yeah, Lefroy, distillery near the town of Aberlour, all that stuff. But then this one, God, James, help me out here. I'm trying to remember what was this one was finished in a sherry
Yeah, so
cask
I
from
think
a
the
village
first
near
one you
Aberlour,
had
right?
was
It was Craig Illicky cask,
the
right?
first one was in a Craig Ellicky sherry butt.
Mm.
And then I think this one was in Kleinleash, number 2.
No,
The 2024 was a Kleinleash expert barrel.
2024
I
is
remember that.
Kleinleash.
I think you
But-
might have gotten 2 Kleinleashes in a row.
No,
I have to dig in my emails, aren't I?
from extra matured Marrying Cask. Yeah, it doesn't say on there.
Well, how about this? Why don't you taste the 2021 next to the 2024 and see if you can figure it out? I don't have these whiskeys in front of you. I mean, if the 2021 was aged in a sherry butt, you should be able to notice it, because I know
You
the
know what, James, you might
2024.
be right.
I'm
James?
fairly certain that you got 2 Kleinleashes in a row.
Oh, all right.
I remember you and I talking about that, James. But yeah, the 2024 is definitely an ex-bourbon barrel from Kleinleash. So the
James?
2021 should be quite distinct if it was finished in a sherry butt.
Well,
No, I think
I
they're
do
both-
know. So there, we did have a choice, right, between doing grain whiskey or a Kleinleash, and I thought the Kleinleash is more interesting.
James, I think I know, because the first 2, we did 2 pairs of 2. Well, not
Yeah.
really, but we did an artist and then a Glasgow, and then we did an artist and a Glasgow together. And you're right, because they were different from the way they were the first time around. I think the first artist was
French oak.
Kleinleash. The second was a French oak.
Yeah.
It was very spicy. And then the first Glasgow was sherry, but the second one was bourbon. So yeah, you're ex Kleinleash, ex American oak. You're right. I think the reason why I'm confused is because we all forgot about the new one, the 2024 balling, until it sort of showed up.
And I think the first time we did one of these tastings, the samples got mixed up as well, right? I don't know if you guys, if you recall that.
That may have happened, but that was before we made Sammy do all the tastings. Now they're all perfect. But you're right. I think the samples did get messed up that time. Anyway, I'm still nosing the first one, and it does have that nice, like, creamy floral vanilla. They're
pretty different.
Similar, but they're different, yeah.
But the blend, yeah, I don't think the blend on Glasgow Blend that hasn't changed in a long time. So the components between the 2021 and the 2024 are probably identical. The recipe is the same. So it really is just that different marrying cask or finishing cask, whatever you want to call it, that makes the difference here.
Cool. The 2024 is sweeter and smokier. I think the 2021 is showing a bit more sherry. It's a bit earthier. But yeah, the 2024 is like brighter and fruitier as well. James?
Yeah, it has kind of a candied note, like that jube flavor is kind of sneaking in that I
jujubes.
usually would never associate with Glasgow Blend.
I've tasted a bunch of these over the years, and it's strange how like the sherry butt, you would think it would kind of like soften the peating, it would kind of sit over the top of it, but it does almost bring it out more. And then conversely, the marrying casks, the Cameron Bridge, the grain whiskey marrying casks, you'd think the peat would be more prominent in those whiskeys, and it's not. It's the reverse. They're actually softer and more gentle. So it's not what you would naturally expect.
Yeah.
They show different aspects of the peat. Let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm. The 2024, the most recent one, what we call cask 3, seems more Lefroy-y. It's got more of that sort of a tarry, maritime, medicinal smoke, and it really, really builds into the finish. Like, it's big. Sammy's disagreeing with me on this, though. Sam Hurry saying he thinks the 2021 is a bit smokier.
Well, my own take, Andrew, would be that the smoke builds on cask 3. But depending on how you classify peat, there are some people that might argue that there's more of that kind of earthy quality. That for some people that is the peat. maybe on number 2. I mean, you chew on the peat more in number 2.
I think the peat's cleaner in number 2. Like, I would describe it, the smoke in number 2 as being more like a Lagavulin smoke or a Kalila smoke, where it's not as much about the peat, it's more about the smoke. Whereas the Laphroaig one is really more, it's more kind of tarry, earthy smoke to my palate. But they're both great. They are
Yeah, they're
very,
both great.
the second one though is more kind of beastly. Like, it's a bit less tamed, it's a bit rougher around the edges, but in a way that I kind of like. It's unrulier, if that's a word.
By the way, that 49 ABV is just lovely.
It's a great drink.
Yeah, the little extra proof.
Oh, it's just perfect.
I forgot to mention, yeah, so these are at the same, we lose about 1% of proof or ABV, whatever, during bottling for whatever reason. I've never really understood that myself. So, but yeah, this is at the same proof that the whiskey goes into the casks.
I think it's all the corners and the tubes that it has to go through, and some of them, I don't like, Scott, I'm sure you've been in a bottling hall at some point. Some of those tubes are those accordion ones too. So like, it's almost like it's got to ripple its way along around it. So I can see it's all the agitation and that, like, when you're squirting it into the bottle, that moment of aeration, it's just an opportunity to lose something, some of those volatile edges. But yeah, I didn't know that either until a couple years ago. I think it was Gordon MacPhail was telling me that, because if you have a whiskey that's at 40%, by the time you go to bottle it, it could be under strength. So
Great.
yeah. Both of Glasgow's are great. Only one of them's on sale until it's gone, but because there's only a little more than a dozen bottles left, the number 2. But the number 3's in. They're both excellent. Let's go to what's been historically my favorite recurring whiskey in the Compass Box stable, the Flaming Heart. Even though the t-shirts aren't made to fit burly men. Scott, yeah, tell us about the new Flaming Heart release.
So yeah, this is the 7th Flaming Heart. So for those of you that haven't had a Flaming Heart before, Flaming Heart was always a blend of a heavily peated single malt and our French oak finish whiskey, essentially Spice Tree up here. That was always the idea behind Flaming Heart. So up until this one, actually, the peated component has always been Kalila. And on this one, Laphroaig is the main peated component. I think there's a little bit Kalila in there, but Laphroaig is the main peated component. So there's a change there on this one. But yeah, that's always the idea. It's always been a blended malt, just a blend of single malts. And it's always been big and brash and rowdy. The name Flaming Heart comes from a rock song by the artist M. Ward, apparently. So John keeps a list of like names for whiskeys on his phone. You know, if he's just thinking of something, he'll just put it in his phone, and then if they're making a whiskey, I'll just kind of, you know, run through the list and be like, yeah, that one fits. And that, you know, Flaming Heart got put with this. So there's obviously, like, you know, you look on the label, I don't know if you can zoom in on the label, there's a bunch of Easter eggs, rock and roll Easter eggs on the label, to different, you know, classic rock bands and so forth like that. Yeah, you can see right there, it's the Kiss face on one angel, the other angel is Pink Floyd. Top left is Led Zeppelin, top right is the Ramones, bottom right is Captain Beefheart, who nobody is familiar with, and bottom left is my personal favorite, Motorhead. So that's the tie-in with all like the little, you know, the imagery on the label and so forth. There is giving it that whole rock and roll kind of vibe as well. And yeah, it's just, yeah, I say it's big, it's brash, it's loud, it's in your face. This is like, you know, just a good loud rock concert of a whiskey. It really is. Now this one has a lot more components than previous ones. I remember, you know, going back in the day, they would have had 4 components in them.
Yeah,
would have been Kalila, Plain Leash, the French oak finished whiskey, and maybe one other whiskey, or maybe even another type of Plain Leash. But there are definitely a lot more components in here. Some of them are old, little bits of old limited editions. I don't know if we have whiskey lying around, but apparently we do. But yeah, there's a lot going on in this one. A little bit of Peat Monster Arcana, Nectar that was done for our, I think our Belgian distributor. A little Flaming Heart 2018 in there, and then Bold Manic, because apparently that's our new Clan Leash.
You probably also noticed, Scott, James Saxon is not afraid to go like 8+ components deep.
No, James. I mean, James does use more components than John. That is one difference between the two of them. John was a minimalist. Maybe out of necessity because they didn't have access to as many whiskeys because we going back 10, 15, 20 years, however long, we probably didn't, have as many barrels to work with as we do right now. So James definitely has that benefit. But yeah, John was definitely like a less is more guy for sure when it came to blending whiskeys. I don't think I'd ever seen a recipe with more than 5 components to it before James came along. But we're still blending less than 10 whiskeys, these days. So
No. It's Flaming Heart's been a favorite of mine for a long time. I remember at one point about 5-6 years ago, I don't, accused is not the right word, but I suggested that Flaming Heart was John's attempt to recreate like Port Ellen when it was like 20-ish years of age. Because of all the Islay whiskeys, it had kind of the most similar profile to it. And then, James, what was the one? What was the Brora one again? It was the Kalila.
Yeah, 3-year-old deluxe, you mean?
No. It was after that.
the 2015, the 5th edition was just 2 types of Kalila, the French oak whiskey and that was it, just those 4 whiskeys.
No, sorry, I was thinking of
Kalila,
Tobias and the
2
Angel.
French oak. Right?
Tobias and the
Tobias.
Angel, I thought was
Oh yeah.
Brora, because it was just Clynelish and Kalila. It had clean smoke, very waxy, very tropical. But Flaming Heart, to me, rightly or not, I don't think this is actually what John did, but I think it unintentionally, the style it created to me reminded me of the Brasher Kalila or Brasher Port Ellens that were available when the whiskeys were only 20, 21, 22 years of age. And most Flaming Hearts have kind of been in that vein. I think this is moving away from it a little bit because, to James's point, there's more components in it now. There's more layers to it now, but it's still, of all the recurring whiskeys in the Compass Box stable, it's still my favorite, the Flaming Heart.
Nice, I love to hear that.
Are you suggesting that when Diageo tries to shoehorn Brora and young Port Ellen back into the market, that there might be a bit of a record scratch with consumers?
Oh, God. Well, I mean, James, I think I'll be ritired by the time both of those
you won't be
distilleries
lined up,
have
to buy one?
anything interesting. By which I mean, 20+ years of age. And at least in the case of Port Ellen, I don't think it's the same whiskey. Brora, at least most of the equipment was still there. Same distillery. They just kind of fixed it up and turned it back on. Port Ellen's a completely different whiskey. To suggest anything otherwise to me is disingenuous.
Well, Serge gave it the stamp of approval.
Yeah, that's new make. I mean, I've tried lots of new make before. I mean, I've been around long enough to try new make from distilleries that didn't have whiskey yet, and it doesn't always lead to what it's going to become. So we'll see. But
I want to say one thing about this this most recent Flaming Heart. I think we've done I've been in part of so many of these tastings. I'm sure you have too, Scott, where you're tasting like 3 or 4 different Flaming Hearts.
Well, you and I did the one in Victoria, remember last year?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we had 3 of them. That happened a couple times. I think there's kind of this automatic thought that we always have of like, oh, well, we get to try like the great old Flaming Hearts when they were like amazing. And I think this one, I've been in a lot of tastings where this one has been voted number 1. And I think that's, that's a great vote of confidence as well.
Yeah, we did. It was just 3 Flaming Hearts we did last time. We did 2015 and 2018, and this was 2023, right?
Yeah.
2022, this one was. And we did those 3. And I think I was the only one that voted for the 2015 in that room of like 40 people. So but it just goes to show that's what's so much fun about whiskey is if we all agreed on what was the best whiskey, there'd be one whiskey out there, right?
Yeah.
One
You
that
know?
the one variable I think that doesn't get talked about enough is, I bet we could do that same range of whiskeys again, Scott, and both you and everybody in that room might have a different favorite because I've tried whiskeys 2 days in a row, like one day to like write a tasting note, and then the second day I'm polishing it, and it seems like a different animal to me the second day I have it because for whatever reason, the climate or my palate is in a different place and it's not the same experience. So
Yeah, I get asked all the time. So it's mostly at trade shows, consumer shows, stuff like that. People ask me all the time, like, what's your favorite Compass Box whiskey? I hate that question because there are so many variables into how you experience what you're tasting. It's not just what's in the bottle. It depends on your mood, the weather, the occasion, what you had to eat before this. I mean, all
I've
these
noticed,
things
Scott, people do the
legitimately.
Mount Rushmore thing with Compass Box. Like every Compass Box enthusiast has like a Mount Rushmore where they at least narrow it to 4.
I try to keep a top 5 in my head, but in all honesty, there's probably 10 whiskeys in my top 5.
James, part of the problem with that concept is some of those whiskeys, there was only several hundred bottles released. So
Yeah, well, I always say you're not allowed to put General on your Mount Rushmore. That's rule number 1.
I don't think General's in my Mount Rushmore, to be honest with you.
oh, it's
It's
on mine.
it's a spectacular whiskey. But yeah, it's just not my person. Yeah, I mean, luxury is still in there for me.
Well, Scott,
That
I think
20,
you were. This was recently. We did that Alberta club tasting where we had General and 3-year-old deluxe and luxury whiskey. And General got less votes than both 3-year-old deluxe and luxury whiskey at the end.
yeah, and it's a matter of like personal taste as much as anything because they're that older style of whiskey. It's almost like Velikov, right? There's an old whiskey, and if you like that rich antique kind of style of whiskey, then they're some of the best. Just my personal palate is I prefer something a little, I don't know, a little crisper, a little more lively, perhaps.
Mhm.
But that's just me. It doesn't mean anything whatsoever, I'm sure we've all, I'm sure a bunch of people on this call prefer the sherried whiskies, and some people might prefer, the peated whiskies, and it's just a matter of personal preference. That's really all it comes down to. But yeah, but God bless whiskey. That's the most
There you
important
go.
thing.
Time for the speed round. Now, Scott, I imagine you don't have most of these in front of you, but James, I suspect you do. And
Yeah, I'm ready to go.
I think it's just you and I because it looks like Harmony's got a big move coming up. So I think she's headed off to pack. So it's just you and I, which will make it speedier. Juveniles.
Yeah, well, this it starts off with some of those like savory components and like putty things when you open it up, and now after it's sat, it's just fruit, like
Yeah.
pulpy pear.
It's pears and like melon. That's what
Yep,
I always
pears and
think of with
melon. Like it
juveniles.
tastes like it's got that commercial fruit juice kind of vibe going.
But I was gonna say like there's that Flintstones chalky vitamins on the
Mhm.
nose. It's nice and waxy, but there's some nice juicy undertones of fruit there. And on the nose is making me think of Sauterne. I'm wondering if the palate is going to make me Jones for some foie gras.
I'm always jonesing for foie gras.
No, I mean, look, this whiskey really does finish exactly like a dry, like Italian or French white wine. It really does.
But there's so much jujube like fruit on the palate too. Like
Yeah.
it's
It
lush.
was designed to be a fun whiskey. I mean, that was essentially the concept behind it.
Yeah. It's yeah. And the white wax top. Gotta love it. All right, Art and Decadence, the James Saxon creation.
Yeah, there's a lot going on here. It's a little busy almost. There's a lot of like it's very dark, it's very caramelized.
It's
It's almost comes across a little bit like that like burnt in the pan type of character.
You know what? We were talking with the Glasgow about cocktails and vermouth. This to me is very much like a Rob Roy on the palate. Like it's got some of those elements of the aromatic bitters. It's fruity, kind of syrupy, but then sweet. And just a little bit of like faint little bit of smoke in there too. It's tasty.
Yeah, the grain whiskey sticks out a little bit after it's been sitting, I feel like.
Mm-hmm.
It is almost, as you say, if a sweet vermouth could be a whiskey,
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of.
It's there. All right. Should we have maybe done Metropolis before Art and Decadence?
Maybe.
The nose is kind of hurting after the Art and Decadence a little bit.
Yeah. Which Art and Decadence, yeah, I was going to say Metropolis is pretty rich in its own right.
Still shows well on the palate. Really lush.
Yeah, one thing's with these extinct blend quartet whiskeys have been so complex and layered. They really do kind of demand more than a speed round, I would say.
I do. I also wish I'd used the old-fashioned blender's glass for this one too, because I think
that would be appropriate. Do you get a kind of plasticky or like new vinyl record note on these?
Sort of.
Metropolis?
But you know, the other thing I get from it is it almost tastes, and it shouldn't have this, but it almost tastes like there's a little bit of OBE going on there too. It's almost as if in the blending they've found a way to make it taste like it's been in the bottle for ages.
It's really good, and it's very different than the first two in the series.
Yeah. I can't wait to try all of them together. Apologize for the cough. All right. First Glasgow. Original Glasgow, I suppose we started. Glasgow, what is it? Classic? Is that what we're going to call this one?
OG.
OG.
Yeah,
I'm just always impressed how they've managed to make Laphroaig so like fresh and lifted and just kind of like almost juicy.
James, the word of the day is elevated.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm only partly saying that because that word gets overused, but I think it is applicable in this case. Glasgow 2, Clynelish 1.
Yeah, a little bit more chocolatey this time around, maybe.
Getting a bit more of that, like that sort of. I often find with Laphroaig, you've got like the Dettol mop bucket, and whether it's the water's clean or not, you're starting to get a little bit of that dirty mop bucket Laphroaig coming through. But man, the smoke on this is very, very clean.
Yeah.
And yeah, I love the balance with the sherry, with the leather, and a little bit of tobacco creeping out.
Well, it's funny you say that because I get a distinct cigar tobacco note in number 3.
Oh. All right, so Glasgow 3, Clynelish 2. I know I'm probably just confusing the hell out of people by throwing all those numbers out now.
Yeah, it strikes me how much more the smoke kind of has like more of a lifted, kind of zesty quality to it.
And like this is so much more tarry, oily, spicy. Yeah, super spicy on the back end.
It's tough to convince myself which one I like better.
I think I know, but we'll save that until people vote. If Evan created a poll, which we're going to find out in a moment, and then we'll be able to share favorites. All right, last one. Back to Flaming Heart, 2023 edition.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I mean, look, this is an all-time Compass Boxer to me. I mean, yeah, I'll be honest. I think this is my favorite Flaming Heart in the entire set. I haven't tried the first two, but yeah, I just absolutely love this. It's just, it's thrilling.
It's very good. All right, I'm going to check to see if we have a poll to share here, in which case I will trigger it and people can vote for their favorites. We do. How about that? Evan asked a third question, as he often sometimes does. What is the third question? Favorite Compass box you have ever had? Type your answer. Oh, it's a short answer question. How about that? That's an interesting. Evan often asks a sarcastic question. That's actually a very good, serious question. While we're thinking about now, Scott, you
Mhm.
you don't have all 7 of these per se in front of you, but if you had to, could you choose a top 3? I know this is difficult. It's like picking your favorite child. Everyone knows you have one.
3 Compass Box or
Don't say
Flaming
it.
Hearts?
What's that?
Top 3 Compass Box or top 3 Flaming Hearts?
Top 3 Compass. Or no, top 3 whiskeys from tonight's tasting. Let's start with that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I was just thinking about that. So Metropolis is my favorite of the bunch. I'm gonna put Glasgow Blend in there just because it may be actually like a significant part of my bloodstream.
Yeah.
I didn't actually get to taste the cast the Marrying Cask with you guys.
Don't worry about those. Everything else.
Boy. Yeah, Flaming Heart's pretty good too, isn't it? But yeah, all right, yeah, let's do with that. Let's go with Metropolis, regular Glasgow Blend, and Flaming Heart. That'll be my 3.
All right, James.
Yeah, number 1 is for sure Metropolis. I mean, oh my dear goodness, it's got so many layers. Number 2 is gonna be Flaming Heart, and yeah, number 3 will be a toss-up between Juveniles, but I think the Slight Edge. I love that cast number 3. I don't know, it's really interesting to me.
Yeah, it is very interesting. I'm going to be almost the same as you, Metropolis, Flaming Heart, but I got to throw it to Juveniles. I mean,
Juveniles is great, isn't it?
Partly for sentimental reasons. Yeah, there was this dinner in Paris with about 10 people that John invited from around the world that have been Compass Box supporters, and it was just an incredible experience. Like there was a guy from Japan, the guy from the Nectar was there. What's his name? One of the guys, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but one of the guys from La Maison Whiskey who's incredible. I think he's like got an Italian name.
Oh yeah.
Sergio. It doesn't anyway, it doesn't it was an incredible experience, very memorable for me. The Glasgows are great though. Before we go to the polls and see how people voted, I'm going to ask each of you Evan's follow-up question. What is your favorite Compass Box blend ever? Scott, you only have to pick one. This is your Desert Island Compass Box, I suppose.
This is not a luxury whiskey.
Yeah, I like it. And do you mind if I ask why? What was
Yeah, it was actually one of the first Compass Box limited editions I tasted, and it just rocked my world. And it is higher proof. As soon as you said Desert Island, I was like, well, I'm kind of go towards the Siler, something like that. But it's just always held this special place in my heart. It's one of it's not the whiskey that made me fall in love with Compass Box. That was Oak Cross, but it was the limited edition that it was. I think it was actually released the day I had my interview with John Glazer, which my interview consisted of getting drunk at a bar with John.
Perfect. It sounds like a good.
Yeah, it's such a great whiskey.
I'm not sure you could do that in an interview anymore, but
yeah, there's this HR thing these days which just takes all they're called the fun police, right?
I'm supposed to be my own HR, but anyway. James.
Yeah.
Desert Island Compass Box. Oh, you guys are there you go. I love it. We've got some synergy here. I love how you've got one at hand. So for you, why is that your favorite?
Well, yeah, I think I'm kind of like classically trained like wine guy, and usually the marker that you're trained to watch for in quality is the length and build of the finish, and that's what separates like great wines from $20 wines. And this Not a Luxury Whiskey has something that General doesn't have, which is this finish that just fans and goes outwards. Yeah, it's pretty spectacular.
Cool. All right. Mine, you might be tempted to think that it's the General, and I love that whiskey, but it's actually the last vatted malt. And the reason it's the last vatted malt is because it was a big middle finger to a huge chunk of the establishment in the whiskey industry. And I love that he did that. I love the concept behind it. And the artwork on the bottle as well is just like it's heroic. So that would be mine. You know, I probably like the general a little better taste wise, but I loved just the brashness and the balls of that release. And people don't know, but there was a glass fatted grain as well. Like, but there wasn't very much of it.
Yeah, it sells for a lot at auction, a lot more than the malt.
Well, there wasn't very many of them, but that last vatted malt was, for me, that was like, I mean, that just laid the groundwork for things like this is not a luxury whiskey for 3-year-old deluxe, like finding ways to continue poking a finger in the eye of the establishment. I loved it. So, all right, let's see what the results are. I'll bring up the polls here. So I'm going to end it. Looks like everyone who could has voted. So here we go. I'm going to share the results. So for first favorite tonight's tasting, Flaming Heart, followed by Metropolis, Art and Decadence, and then a tie between, and Evan screwed this up, it's the regular Great King Street Glasgow and the cask number 3 for KWM. Second favorites, let's see what happens. These are often the more interesting ones. Metropolis, and then the Great King Street Glasgow has got a really strong showing for cask 2 and cask 3 in second favorites. And then I don't know how that type your answer worked out. Let me see. I think I can pull this up. I just don't know if I can share it. Come on. I think something's loading. Many of you have punched this in the chat. I might not be able to share these results. We'll see. I'm not sure if anything's opening. Anyway, I don't want to keep people here too long with we'll maybe follow up after the fact because I don't see where that information. Maybe it's going to Evan. Evan knows the answer of what people's Compass Box dream. Oh, wait, hold on. It's very slowly loading. While it's slowly loading, James Scott, I mean, we talked a little bit about things that are coming. Obviously, the new hedonism's coming. The last edition in the extinct blends. Is there anything else coming in the kind of next 6 months that people might want to keep an eye out for?
Well, yeah, yes. There's always something new. We have the worst case of whiskey ADHD. We really do. We make something and we're done with it straight away. We want to make something else at Compass Box. Yeah, there's actually going to be some changes up here coming this year. There's going to be I think that's about all I can say, to be honest with you. But yeah, there's going to be so yeah, you've got Hedonism, you've got Celestial. There's one more limited edition, but that's scheduled for release in I think November in the US. So you guys probably won't get it till
June 2025.
2038. But
it'll
yeah,
come with the Glasgow Blend number 4.
But yeah, keep an eye on our core collection is what I would say for this year. There's going to be some new things coming along there, some changes coming up on the top shelf, not the bottom shelf. That's all I can say. So yeah, it's going to be as the biggest year we've ever had with regards to our core collection this year. So,
well, even I'm curious now, Scott.
I know. You don't even know, do you?
Well, I have a few hints.
Yeah.
The last time we had beers in Victoria, you dropped a few
yeah, but I mean that was over a year ago, my friend.
Yeah, so, that is over a year.
Yeah, I mean there are some things changes. You're going to see some things. If you guys, honest to God, I'm not trying to sell here or anything like that. If you want to keep up to date with everything going on at Compass Box, jump on the website www.compassboxwhiskey.com. Bottom right hand corner of the page, it's like sign up for our newsletter, and I swear to God, you might get an email every 2 weeks. Right, we're not gonna, be blowing your inbox up or anything like that. But that is the best way to stay up to date on everything Compass Box. You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook as well. Those are good ways to do it as well. but there will be some exciting news coming out probably in the late summer, I would say.
Very, very cool. So funny story, I forgot to plug my laptop in and it failed to warn me that my juice was running out. Meanwhile, I was trying to load this, but I think I finally got the answer here. I'm seeing these are the people's favorite desert island Compass Box. We've got Menagerie, Phenomenology, Hedonism Quindecimus, General, Flaming Heart 15th Anniversary, Phenomenology, and Aquamarine, Circle Middle.
Ultramarine. That'll be Ultramarine.
Yeah, they wrote Aquamarine, but I think we all know they meant Ultramarine. The KWM Anniversary Bottling, Delos. They added, I went with my gut. That's a tough one. No Name number 1, No Name number 2, No Name number 1. I can't remember the exact name, but it was a Kensington Wine Market 30th anniversary release, and it was amazing. So there you go. You did remember the name. It was, and actually you had that chat with John. He's like, what should we call it? I'm like, it is what it is. That it's celebrating the 30th anniversary. John wanted to name our 25th anniversary the Fort Whoop Up Blend because I told him the story about this establishment in southern Alberta that was trying to stop Americans from smuggling whiskey into Alberta. And I was like, John, it's a great story, but it's not about Calgary and it's not about Scotch whiskey. So I think I talked him out of it, but yeah, you got it. Some great bottles on that list. Scott, thank you very much for doing this. Nice to see you virtually. I'm sure we'll see you in person at some point in the future.
I can't wait. Yes, long overdue for sure.
Yeah.
And thank you everybody for coming on tonight. It's been a lot of fun. Seriously, I love doing these. I wish I could be there a lot more often with you guys in person, but this is the next best thing, and it really is a lot of fun.
Well, we'll have you in for a tasting when you're around these parts. James, thanks as always. And I will say, James was with Authentic Wine and Spirits. They're one of our best partners. They're great to work with. They're really good with Compass Box, and we're grateful for that. So thanks everybody for tuning into the tasting tonight. Hope you enjoyed it. Check out all the other events we've got coming up in the future. And to Scott's point about his newsletter, make sure you're getting our Malt Messenger, or you might not have found out about the Springbank tasting in store that sold out in like 45 minutes and people got cranky. But that's why there's a newsletter. Everybody gets informed at the same time. So thanks everybody. Until next time, have a good night and we'll talk soon.
Thanks everyone. Good night.
Thank you.